Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who podcast in which I, Z-list Doctor Who bore Toby Hadoke, gets a special guest to choose a Doctor Who story and I have to guess what their favourite things about it are.
Okay, so I am Andrew Cartmel. For my sins, I script edited Doctor Who. I did all of the Sylvester stuff, all of the Seventh Doctor, so I did 3 years. And I was very struck by Dragonfire.
Well, welcome. I hope you haven't waited 3,000 years to watch the final instalment of Dragonfire with me. We're going to mine it for the positives. Let's see what we find. We're going on an ant hunt. Press play now. So yeah, my initials were on the cover of the book. That was such an exciting thing to happen. I thought if you could be a part of Doctor Who somehow, life would be complete. And it's very nice to make a modest contribution to some aspect of the show. I've been very lucky. Life still throws its things at you though, doesn't it? But when it does, Doctor Who is there. And I don't know what my life would have been like without it. And I certainly couldn't have imagined, as I watched this at home, as I did at the age of 13. Gosh. So I think the 3-part length is really nice. It's sort of, stories are only told in 25-minute longer than that now, and it does give the McCoy era a certain sort of raciness. These capers, fly by really. And the contrast between this and Delta and the Bannermen is nice. And I like these two characters, Bazin and McLuhan, who weren't in episode 2, didn't say anything in episode 1, and so I was very much puzzled going, what do these guys do? But then the trailer for this had the bit where McLuhan goes, and it comes along in the darkness or whatever. So you knew that they were going to get a bit to do. But Stuart Organ was all over the shop back in those days, and of course is now famous for being Mr. Robson in Grange Hill, who started, I think, as the PE teacher and became the headmaster. And Stephanie Fairman as McLuhan has popped up in various bits and bobs over the years, and I like her in this. But there is a curious moment that we will talk about when we get to it, so that's something to watch out for. It's a bit that's always puzzled me. I do like the fact that the map is an old treasure map. I like the sort of old-fashioned. It's quite Hartnellish, isn't it? Let's go on a quest. Where it's very self-consciously an adventure, a treasure hunt. He's you can stop sliding about now, Sylvester. We get the message. Also, he does do it very well. I sometimes think. Well, I was going to say no, little and often, not little. Well done, Mel. There's Bonnie Langford there trying to get some banter going with Glitz, because otherwise it's a Leela Andrit kind of situation. Yeah. Yeah, I like these two. They've got quite a nice dynamic, and I like the reverse that, the tall bloke is the slightly scared and inexperienced one. This is the bit that was on the trailer, I think. And that the sort of smaller woman is the hard case. I like that. And again, they're minor characters who are just a sort of little bit of a subplot, and they're aiming for the aliens vibe. This is Hicks and Hudson, but in TV Centre 6 or wherever it is they are. Don't know where they are. Actually, I'm watching this. I am impressed with the lighting. I think the lighting has worked wonders to transform these sets, which you can sort of tell there's a bit of cellophane and a bit of this and a bit of that, but in terms of how they're going to create the illusion, because of course if this was a film, you'd have different angles, you'd have each shot would be individually lit. This set's magnificent, and the heights that we get on the cameras here is rather marvelous. And you can see that Chris Clough was absolutely right in what he wanted from Edward Peel, was this sort of intense, icy, chilling, all of those sort of cliched descriptors for somebody who lives in an ice cave / freezer center. I mean, do they need the freezers because they are on an ice planet? It doesn't matter. And I remember I went to this Panopticon convention. So this was the one after I'd met Sophie Aldred, because she was announced at one I went to. So that was 87, and hadn't been in it yet. I think they called her up on stage as the winner of a competition, and then it was revealed, oh no, this is the future. Did anyone recognise her? Because she'd been announced at that. Yeah, she'd been announced at that point, but she'd not been seen on screen. And so, of course, whoever the MC was, I think it might have been Nick Briggs, said, "And did you recognise her?" And loads of people went, "Yeah," and it's like, well, yeah, I bet you didn't, because you didn't get that feeling in the room of people go, "Oh, that's the new companion." So anyway, that was quite fun. And I did meet her, got her autograph then, and she was very friendly. She gave me my pen back. And and then at a late convention I was at, must have been, because I asked a... Oh, yes, he gets shot. That's quite horrible. Well hidden Stellar. I'd hidden under the table. I asked a question, and was so nervous. I asked the question of the Sylvester McCoy writers panel. Ian Briggs went on it, therefore, as was Andrew Cartmel, and I said, was the melty face moment there put to be a big moment because it was consciously the end of the season? And they said no, but they said it more politely, and I think at more length than that. And I really stumbled. I'd got the question in my head, but it didn't come out as easily as I'd hoped. Suddenly, the momentousness of the occasion affected my vocal cords, which, seeing as I've since interviewed Ian Briggs and Andrew Cartmel, and had the great pleasure of chatting to quite a few Who luminaries, I still never quite lose those childhood nerves. I'm talking to the people that make the thing I love. Yes, the little girl wandering about is, they're trying to do Aliens, aren't they? Aliens is a fantastic film. That's nicely lit, and again, we have to appreciate the lofty ambitions, and those, really atmospheric bits in Aliens. But you get the close up of the radar-y bits, and the bleeping on the monitors, which suggest the menace that is all around you that you cannot see, and of course you've got much more access to sort of Foley and sound effects and post-production and all that sort of thing. This is all shot in real time and with a limited number of cameras, and those cameras all have to be next to each other, etc., etc. So it's never going to look like Aliens. I think if you're a kid and you know of Aliens, you probably shouldn't have seen Aliens, but I think you appreciate the homage. Yeah, I like the Bazin and McLuhan subplot for what it's trying to do, even though, yeah, I mean, is it wise or is it foolhardy to try and ape a multi-million-pound dollar movie in a TV studio? She's quite good. I hated her at the time. I found her utterly pointless. But she makes the dragon rather sweet. She's fine. She's fine. I wonder what she's doing now. Miranda Borman. Oh, and yes, and of course that they all go on to. I remember that I didn't do the commentary for this. I was given the choice of Happiness Patrol or Dragonfire, and I chose Happiness Patrol because I think that's quite a fascinating one. But I remember being in, because I was there when they recorded it. I remember Chris Clough, the director, going, "Another crap model, sorry," and I admired him for that. I think it's an absolutely fine model. I like the model work in this. I like Tony Selby there, realizing that you can't thump too hard on the doors lest they give way. I actually like the model work, and I prefer this sort of model work to CGI. But maybe that's just because that's what I was used to when I was brought up. But I like a good old model. That's great. And boom. But this does throw up the... Because Glitz gets very cross here, I recall. He sort of goes, "Kane!" And you go, right, so you're more upset that he's blown up your spaceship than he was that he zombified your crew. Yeah, this is good acting from Tony Selby. Yeah, you mean business, Sabalom Glitz. Although, of course, when we met him in Trial of the Time Lord, the first thing he and Dimmer tried to do was shoot the Doctor. So he's a changeable fellow, I think we can generously say about Glitz. That's an actor being good value and both on and off screen, and people going, okay, well, we might have to tinker with what you've given us in order to bring you back and make more of you, which is fine. I do like the Doctor's costume apart from the question marks. It's got a good silhouette. Yeah, so he's been zapped and he's got a slightly blackened shoulder. I do like Ace's red tights. They're quite fun. Oh yeah, because he's Kane is waiting for her in her bedroom, isn't he? I like the fact they've made no attempt to make the shopping basket space age. And I don't know where Customer has been, where Barry Norman, the Customer, has been, because she's obviously unaware that the entire the poor dragon, that the entire inhabitants of the bar that she left her child in have been utterly destroyed. So I don't know what. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she's off her knackers on space milkshake. Right. This is the bit that is curious for me. I think this is quite nicely done in that there's a bit of smoke going on when they chop its head off. But Mr. Camel's head, I ain't never leave a job half done. She's playing the part in RP, and that works for me entirely. She nearly lasers her knee then. But so where that line comes from, so maybe she was written in, to be a bit more colloquial or regional or whatever, but it just means that she's doing all of this very severe, very good sort of RP, severe space guard sort of thing, and then she says the line, "I ain't never leave a job half done." That doesn't even actually mean anything. I ain't never left a job half done. I ain't never gonna leave a job. That sequence of words, I find entirely baffling. I wonder if I'll probably forget to ask Andrew about it. So anyway, but I like those two, and sorry then, I feel particularly sad for Stuart Organ, who seemed like quite an affable sort of fellow, and he suffers the same fate as his more severe more seasoned, slightly more sadistic cohort who is as cavalier with the life of a benign alien spaceship as she is with colloquial language. But that's neat that the monster is the treasure. I really like this this model of the planet and the fact that they, highlight the fact that it's got that light side at the bottom and the dark side with the shopping centre on it at the top. That's a really neat image. And again, Dominic Glynn doing wonders with the soundtrack. And of course, this was the end of the season. And he got Doctor Who for 14 weeks of the year, which seemed like slim pickings back in the day. And I know we sometimes only get 10, 12, 30, 40, but they're longer episodes. But also, I mean, I came off the back of Doctor Who when it was being on for a good 20 odd weeks while stocks last. He's great. He's entirely consistently good, is Edward Peel. And this is, of course, the end of Sylvester McCoy's first season, and he's really sort of got to grips with it as he's gone on. I think it was a bit of a baptism of fire for him. Oh, I've not noticed her hanky before. I quite like her. Has anyone cosplayed the hanky? Somebody cosplayed a hanky. That teddy bear had a marvellous career. He was in several episodes of Bergerac. He's dead now. I wrote his obituary. Sophie Aldred knows how to stand as if she's been captured and is desperate to escape, and yet can't because of the confines of the shot and the nature of the way the television is made and blocked in those days. She's giving good angle. Yeah, that's a good stance. And Ian Briggs, who I've had the honour of interviewing, he actually came to Manchester, bless him, and wouldn't let me pay for his train fare. What a kind man! And he's emailed me a couple of times in COVID. Actually, is a really interesting mind. I mean, I have to say, Andrew Cartmel's recruiting policy for writers showed again great ambition. I don't think season 4 24 quite comes together, but I think its shortcomings are often in the production department, and productions do get better in 25 and 26. But I think Andrew Cartmel came to Doctor Who with great ambition, but also a desire to give a break to writers he thought were interesting, rather than just to go for people you knew could do the job and deliver on time and blah blah blah, which was often celebrated, and that's another good reason to celebrate somebody in the treadmill that was Doctor Who in the 70s. Say, Sophie Aldred's great here. She's 100% convinced she's going to die. It's great. But to say Doctor Who is something where we can get young, hungry writers to really use their imagination, and in this case, to wear their influences on their sleeve. There's nothing wrong with being influenced by good films. This is great. This is suddenly, this is the climax. I don't know what those panels lighting up particularly sort of mean or oh yeah, and it's a spaceship. Yeah, the whole colony is a spaceship. Boom. That's quite a big moment. That's a decent model. So, and it's the end. This is the climax. So yeah, the colony's a spacecraft. We're taking off. He's got his power. Yeah. This is great. And those writers that Cartmel wanted to sort of hone over the series. And I think if the show had carried on, we'd have seen these writers develop more, and become, the next generation's Terence Dicks's and Robert Holmes's and all of those sorts of things. But sadly, Doctor Who did not have long left. But I think I think it was headed in the right direction. But this is clearly a developmental stage. It'd be interesting to ask Andrew if 2 seasons later he would have allowed an ice planet, because I think it does take a lot of goodwill on the part of the viewer. I'm not entirely sure why Kane in the 3,000 years didn't check that his home world hadn't been destroyed. I mean, he obviously doesn't have the space internet. This is astonishing. Of course, this is Raiders of the Lost Ark in Doctor Who, and it's brilliant. That is really well done and pretty grim, and a great way to end the season. There's a great model shot. Yeah, as I say, I mean, you know, there's one thing on being so focused on your revenge at the expense of all else, but it's all, somebody to rung up, so I'm going to come and kill you. What? They've gone? Where have they moved? The planet's been destroyed. Oh, okay. But there we go. And you know, this is a real sign of how even this late in Doctor Who's making, you know, we used to sort of people leaving overnight in the 60s and 70s. We go, yeah, well, that was back in the day. I think it was that they weren't sure she was going to leave, and this is a hastily contrived exit. Now, why would you stop going through space and time with the Doctor to go through just space with Glitz? I've no idea. That aside, this is a lovely speech. He does it really well. There's a real melancholy. He's like a sad bird, Sylvester McCoy. That lovely sort of quizzical melancholy face that he has. He's got a brilliant face. It's the perfect face for a Doctor. It's you know, clown-like, but also maudlin. A wistfulness that he has from, you know, time travel and all the death and destruction you encounter as a part of it. And he and Bonnie Langford do that very well. And I feel for Bonnie Langford now. I was delighted she was going, because just the very idea that Bonnie Langford was in Doctor Who was something that I was teased about. But I think that was a lack of imagination on all our parts. And actually, with time taking us further away from that, she doesn't stick out in this particularly, and she's a very game performer, and I think Mel's quite jolly. Oh yes. I wonder what they got up to, Glitz and Mel. It is. Oh, that's very sweet. Yeah, bye. But yeah, I don't know why you've gone. And here we start one of the great Doctor Who pairings that they do really interesting things with. So it's a launch pad, this really, for a series that very quickly learns what it does well and learns what it shouldn't try to do. And I'd be interested to talk to Andrew to see whether he gives any ground as to, well, and to see why he chose this one. I gave him the choice of the stories that were left, and he chose this one. So I'd be interested to see all sorts to discuss it with him. Come on, they've got a sale on because the proprietor's home planet's been destroyed, and they've got to get some good reviews on TripAdvisor to make up for the mass murder of the last set of customers. So there we go. That was Dragonfire, which I was, as I say, I hadn't seen for a while, and I'd liked at the time more than some, but then I think, because the last time I saw Delta and the Bannermen, I absolutely adored it. And I think I preferred then the attempt to be a bit more fun and a bit more silly. So the fact that this one takes itself quite seriously in places, I thought, well, that is too much of a clash with the obvious limitations and the slight campiness of the production. But I thought that melded quite well. Lynn Lynn Gardner, who is the Tannoy announcer, was supposed to play Ray in Delta and the Bannermen, and she broke her leg or damaged herself anyway, and had to drop out. So it's very decent of Chris Clough to give her a paid job on the. She still got paid for being Ray, but to give her a credit for her CV and a paid job on the show that she couldn't be in through injury. So well done, Chris Clough. That was very decent of you. This business does have, actually, for all its reports of backstabbing and bitchiness and narcissism and vainness, that they're actually decent people, and you can be very well looked after if you're lucky enough to work with the right people. So I've got to choose two things about Dragonfire, one about part 3 and one general overall. I think I have to choose. I'm tempted to choose Bazin and McLuhan, but I think I'm going to choose whose deaths you see in the DVD menu. I hate that. It's not as bad as the Horror of Fang Rock one, though, which basically shows you what happens to every single guest character. If I had time, I'd find out who did that, and I'd go and tell them off. I think I'm going to choose for episode 3. Well, I'm tempted to choose the music, because Dominic Glynn is so good, and Edward Peel as Kane, because he's so good. I've got to think about what Andrew Cartmel is going to choose as well, to see if I can choose the same as him. And I've got to also not be predictable. So do I want to choose the melty face? I've got 4 things. I've got Bazin and McLuhan, I've got the melty face, I've got Edward Peel, and I've got Dominic Glynn. And I was sort of saving Edward Peel and Dominic Glynn as my jokers, in case there were other things I couldn't choose. And I've chosen a scene in episodes 1 and 2. I am going to choose... I like Bazin and McLuhan going through. I like that subplot. I really like her performance. That's no disrespect to Stuart Organ. I don't think he's got as good a part, and he does it perfectly well. But I quite like severe gun-toting people. They do it for me. And I'm gonna choose the melty face, because it was amazing. It was about. I'm gonna do lots of these stories, and I'm sure Dominic Glynn's music will be a featured, will be a choice in pretty much all of them. And his score for this is great. But I'm going to go on record with Bazin and McLuhan and the melty face of Edward Peel, who also just misses out, even though he's great. And I could have chosen him in any episode because he's consistently good. But I wonder what Andrew Cartmel will have chosen. So let's go to the future. And now we go to, although you haven't broken it up into episodes, the final episode
You want me to say what I'm saying first because you've written it down?
I will do that, and I'll just establish, because each episode is separate. Although Andrew hasn't chosen necessarily specific episodical things, that's okay, because I've chosen one from episode 3 and then a general thing for the whole story. So it's 2 things I am choosing now, and I also have the 2 things I nearly chose because it was an embarrassment of riches.
Well, let me give you 2 things.
Yeah.
Then, Winnie and I sat down to plot the story. We put a lot of work into the details of what was going on in terms of what people were looking for and why it was there. And we loved the notion that there was a dragon guarding a treasure, but the dragon was the treasure. And then when the skull opens and we find the crystal inside, I've always been very proud of that. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, somewhat self-servingly, the crazy paving speech.
Yeah, well, those are 2 things. I did go on quite a lot about the treasure being the dragon, because that's a great, in terms of a dramatic lift, at a crucial point in the story. That's a great piece of sort of plotting, and I think they'd call it now a WTF moment.
Yeah, well, also it is. It's a really good twist and a reveal, and also it's just a beautiful intertwining of two tropes: the creature that guards the cache of gold and the cache of gold.
Yeah, and I think the crazy paving speech is sort of acknowledged as a classic. I feel I might have been a bit lazy had I chosen that, and also because I chosen a scene and a sort of scene for episodes 1 and 2. I chose slightly different. Well, I chose the obvious just because I remember watching it as a kid, and it was my goodness. Another WTF mode.
Let me guess. Is Eddie Peel's face melting?
It's melty face. It's melty face. Yeah.
I'm glad I guessed.
And I actually asked a question at a panopticon that you were at when I was an errant child, and I got really, really nervous. It was really funny because because the story was in my head, but it's people from Doctor Who, and I'd said, had you guys put that in because it was self-consciously an end of season moment because you knew that it was the last story in the last episode, and you sort of basically said no, it was just great for the end of the story, but it did feel like the season. This season's come to a close. There's a big moment at the end, but it's really well done and it stands up today. It's great.
Yeah, and in fact, we should include the unedited version of that because it was considerably trimmed. It was in its full glory. It's even more gruesome. It is, of course, also the same basic technique that they used in Raiders: The Lost Ark for melting Nazi number one. But I think what I should have said to younger Toby, if I'd been more on the ball, was that we were never entirely sure what sequence the stories would go out in. It was never entirely fixed. But things could get juggled around, especially with those last two, the all OB and the all studio three-parters. So it couldn't really have been a carefully planned, deliberate end of season.
Right. You may well have said that. It was a long time ago, but you were very nice to a stuttering child. You and Ian, I remember. Now, I'll tell you what here's what you could have won, what I nearly chose, and actually what I thought at the beginning of the process I probably would have chosen. These would have been what I'd have fallen to if I'd found nothing else to enjoy. Is obviously, I think Edward Peel is a fantastic villain. He judges it absolutely perfectly. He is ice cold. And also...
Or, one might say, even ice hot.
Well, indeed.
Reference to another story.
And another story in which my next choice is involved, who I think will get chosen a lot during this process, so I thought it would be cheating and repetitive, just because I don't think he ever puts a foot wrong, and that is Mr. Dominic Glynn, whose music I think is cracking.
Oh, yes, I would say that Survival and Happiness Patrol are two of the towering masterpieces that he created. But Dominic, yes, I just think we had a lot of talented people doing the music for Who, and I liked all of them. But Dominic, I think, is the greatest. I love his stuff particularly, and he's a good mate. And I'm now writing a vinyl detective thriller about techno music, so I'm on the phone to him all the time.
Oh,
he was part of that scene in the 90s and the early 2000s.
Well, he's very kindly done me a theme to one of my sister podcasts to this, but that's not why I chose him. I put a plea on Facebook for up and coming comedians, and he went, "I'll do it." Not comedians, up and coming musicians, and he went, "I'll do it. I've got time." So the thing I chose, this might surprise you, but I liked it the first time round, and it still worked for me this time round. I liked Bazin and McLuhan's Ant Hunt. Just because I thought they were nice characters, they were nicely played. It was a little subplot that one of those things that you can do in Doctor Who, whereas you could provide a couple of characters who you like, who get things to do, who have their own little thing that happens that's tangential to the plot, but sort of important because they have to kill the dragon, but that just keeps you interested in a sort of B plot.
Let me give you a couple of quick observations about that. Ian adored James Cameron's Aliens and the bug. He always loved the bug hunt in that, and he wanted to come up with something equivalent. And he came up with this cool thing that they call the alien an ANT, an aggressive non-terrestrial, so he could have an ant hunt instead of a bug hunt. That's one of the memories that comes back to me, and how much he loved fashioning that. And the other thing is, I remember when one character throws the other character this huge gun, and they just catch it. And I was in the studio when they were shooting that, and I said, "That gun's heavy. The prop is very light, but they've got to act like it's heavy." And they took that note, and it really looks like they're being thrown this very heavy blaster now. And every time I see it, I feel a little thrill of satisfaction.
You gave it that realism. There was a slightly strange moment, though, that really jumped out to me. And I think she's brilliant, Stephanie Fairman, who plays McGowan. But she has this curious line that seems to me... Oh,
sorry, mate, Steve Broster. Shall I just chat while you're there? That'd be creepy, wouldn't it? You can have a cup of coffee or whatever.
This is DVD talk.
Steve, by any chance?
At this point, Andrew took the call in order to negotiate his fee for the forthcoming Season 24 Doctor Who Blu-ray release. But that negotiation was neither for my ear nor for yours. Anyway, then we got back to it. Right, I
would be interrupted.
I was going to ask you a question, which about my thing that's...
Fun, by the way.
Sorry?
This is lots of fun.
It's really interesting, and this is great because everyone has reacted to this very differently, and I've had some really...
Well, we were talking about the bug hunt and about throwing the gun, and it's just one of those little moments that I've always maintained this pride about, because there was often things that we didn't get right, but there were things that you could just get right by just passing a note to John or to the director or to the actors via. So you never talk directly to an actor because that would be naughty. But yeah, occasionally we could just sneak in quickly before a take and elevate something, and that was an occasion where we did that.
A part of it that is, and I still like it, and I like the performance and I like characters, but one bit that really stuck out is where McLuhan says, "Mr. Kane wants the head, and I ain't never leave a job half done." And you go, "Oh, was this written to be done in Cockney or Northern?" But she's done it RP, and it was quite a jar. It did amuse me, but
I didn't notice that in the viewing of it. I'd have to go back and look at the scripts, but I don't particularly. I think she just fluffs the line. Is that possible?
It's a funny one. It's a sudden jar. It doesn't matter.
I think it might just have been that she fluffed the line. There wasn't time for a retake. And when I say fluff the line, we're talking about top actors here, really great actors.
She's great.
Everybody fluffed the line sometimes. Just unfortunately on Doctor Who, there was not always the time and the money to shoot everybody to their best advantage. That would be my guess about what it was, but we'd have to look at Briggsy's script to see if... I don't think she'd been written in any particularly demotic way, though.
Right. Well, she's still great. It's just that bit just sort of amused me.
They're all good because they got these really interesting names, which I think are all taken from film critics.
Yes.
Film analysts, the upper end of intellectual film critics. But anyway, I know that Ian had a scheme for choosing the names. They're really cool names, but they've all they're not ciphers. They're not two-dimensional cardboard cutouts. They're all interesting characters.
No, they're film critics and film theorists. I did wonder during it why, therefore, the customer didn't have a name and why she wasn't called Barry Norman or something. But
that's the word. It was a film theorist. That's exactly right. But what I wanted to get in here at some point that I think is so important, and I haven't been able to say recently, is whenever I'm interviewed about Ian, whenever I had a chance to talk to about him, I always bang on about what a genius writer he is in terms of character, which is true. But watching this again, I thought, you know what? His dialogue is really first rate as well. He's a terrific, terrific writer of dialogue. So I feel that I've neglected that at the expense of the superb nature of his characterization. And if I seem to be singing rapturously about Ian, it's because he was so damn good. And still is. Just needs to be... They need to commission him for the new series. That's what they need to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was something I talked about in the commentary, is that you had a laudable policy of going, what do we do with Doctor Who? Do we get people who I know can deliver on time and will do a job, which was often Doctor Who's history is littered with that, and it's a perfectly reasonable approach when you're making series television up against it, or what you did.
Toby, allow me to make this observation. Those safe hands who were always hired because they could deliver on time and do a workmanlike job, they were always handing in scripts that didn't work. Not because they were grossly incompetent, but because Doctor Who is a really tough format to crack. I mean, if you're Robert Holmes, you're in a pretty good position, but if you're just about anybody else, it's a really tough format to crack. I'd say Robert Holmes or Ben Aronovich, maybe Mark Patton. The only reason I say maybe is because Mark loves the show so deeply, he can get lost in a kind of mirrored hall of Doctor Who lore. Whereas people like Ben Aronovich, even more than Robert Holmes, would always be following their guide through the labyrinth would always be to write a cracking piece of tight television drama. So the way that most television dramatists failed was that they just had no idea what is Doctor Who. Even if they understood science fiction, say that you were somebody who's nurtured on something like Quatermass, one of the greatest TV science fiction things of all time, that would not qualify you to write for Doctor Who, because Doctor Who was just kind of a different beast. Although it wouldn't be a bad background, I must say. I must say Quatermass to Doctor Who would be an interesting transition. But Who wasn't strictly just science fiction. It was something out of its own peculiar little thing. And it was not easy getting writers attuned to that thing.
But what you did was you got relatively new writers and you gave them a break, and they were obviously hungry for the challenge. It meant they used their imagination. I think it's a policy that obviously, you know, that paid off, but did some good as well.
Well, we gave these writers their first break. In the case of Stephen Wyatt, he already had a bit of a background. Graham Curry had sold a radio script. Rona had been writing for some, I think, Take the High Road, a Scottish soap opera. But otherwise, I think we pretty much broke these guys into television.
Well, that's brilliant. Well, look, you've been the first person that's worked on the show that's chosen a story for me, and I gave you the list of the McCoys that were left because they're getting snapped up. I have to say, in the week that I'm talking to you, I've had somebody send me an enthusiastic video about Time and the Rani and a 20-minute monologue about Remembrance of the Daleks.
Well, that is a story worth a 20-minute monologue. I wanted to say, when I chose the crazy paving speech and said it's self-serving, I'd like to just very briefly, not 20 minutes length, but just briefly explain what I meant by that. For anybody who doesn't know, and I'm sure there's millions, I wrote a couple of short audition scripts when we were casting the Doctor, and one of these was a farewell scene between the Doctor and the companion. I wrote two different short scripts, one of which showed the Doctor as hard and the other as soft. In other words, in one of them he's confronting a baddie and showing strength and darkness and a hard edge, whereas the other scene, which obviously was the idea, was to give the actor a chance to show their range. So the other scene was written in complete contrast. So it was a soft, sad, sentimental farewell scene where the companion's leaving and the Doctor is missing her already. And so I wrote the scene and everybody loved it. It was written under the influence of Nicholas Roeg, who was a filmmaker who would fragment time in really interesting ways. If you see films like Don't Look Now or Bad Timing or Performance, you'll see what I mean. And Alan Moore, who was very much following in the same mold, who was under the influence of Nick Roeg, who had written this incredible thing about Dr. Manhattan. I say it that way because I can never remember if it's Dr. Manhattan or Professor Manhattan in The Watchmen, who sees time in this same kaleidoscopic way. So I wrote something in that vein, and it came off really well, and everybody loved it. And Sylvester loved it so much, he kept trying to get it, to crowbar it into the show at some point. And so when we had Bonnie Langford actually leaving, he was really keen to do that scene. So, and we were really keen not to stick a piece of somebody else's writing into Ian's script. So Ian wrote his version of that scene and did a very good job. But the way they went about it was that Sylvester, from the production office across the corridor, Chris Clubb's production office, where they were making Dragonfire, they said, "Oh, could we just see the original audition script just so we can compare it?" And the next thing I knew, they were photocopying it and sort of sticking it in the script. And I can't pretend that I was entirely unhappy about that, because no writer feels bad about having their words spoken by terrific actors and being immortalized to some extent, in a TV show. So, but Ian was a bit disappointed about that. So I've always feel a little bit conflicted about that. And the reason I say it's self-serving is because some of those words in that scene were my words, but it comes off really well, and I think it's a good moment in the show.
And it's perfectly okay to be happy with something you've done that people like. That's okay. Well, look, Andrew, thank you. And I have to point out that I do have this, I think, 18-20 minute monologue about Remembrance of the Daleks, but I haven't listened to it because, of course, I never listen to the reasons until after I've watched the show. I just check it for technical quality at the beginning. So it is an undiscovered country for me, but it's one that's going to take me between 18 to 20 minutes to get to. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being game for this and for entering into it with such enthusiasm and offering, rather than just to give a reason, but to give some insight into the process, because I know that whoever watches this will be thrilled by that. So thank you.
Well, it's really been fun.
So that was what Andrew chose. I don't know that yet. So as I round off this episode, you know something I don't. So I've actually managed to get right to the end of the story without being aware of a vital piece of information, which is, as we've discovered, strangely apposite. And so with that, I think I'm just going to go and look out the window. See you next time for another story that will hopefully take us to one of our happy times and places. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Andrew Cartmel, on Twitter at Andrew Cartmel and online at venusianfrogbroth.blogspot.com. That's his blog, venusianfrogbroth.blogspot.com. Going on an ant hunt with me in Patreonville at the moment are Ian Gillespie, James Gould, Lisa C. Greco, Dave Hoskin, Jessica Jones, Andrew Jordan, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Gavin McLean, David Matthewman, John McClay, Ross McPhillips, Stuart Mitchell, Nathan Moore, Matthew Newton, Melvin Pena, Keith Pirrie, Jonathan Potter, Dylan Rees, John Rivers, Matt Sawyer, Keith Say, Len Stewart, Neil Tate, Nick Tedstone, Nick Temple, Sabrina Tirabassi, and Reynard Toombs. The music for this podcast is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you want to hang around in Patreonville getting early releases and exclusive material, you can do so for as little as £3 a month. Although if you get a year, there's currently a 10% discount across the whole year at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. If you can't or don't want to do the monthly model, there's a one-off payment option at kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. But whilst financial support is appreciated, I am completely aware it is not always possible or indeed desirable, but I'll tell you what costs you nothing. Going to your podcast outlet and giving this 5-star reviews and perhaps some detailed feedback that's, nice and that will lure other people into my zone. And it always makes my algorithms look just that bit sexier. And my algorithms need all the lift they can get. You can support live comedy by checking out my comedy club Excess Malarkey, which is back live in Manchester in July every Tuesday at 8 p.m. and also exists online at twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey, where, again, we do an online show every Tuesday at 8 p.m, although that will be stopping when we go back to live. But there's also an archive of stuff that shows what we've been up to with special guests from around the world during lockdown, trying to bring cheap, affordable, actually free comedy to everybody that we possibly can with the very best talent available. And we're a long-running 24 years old club, so there's a lot of talent available to us. Check it out.